Hello and welcome. We are going to be starting the webinar very, very shortly, but we wanted to at least open up the room. So hang out for a few minutes and we'll get started shortly. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Jessa Morgan, and I'm part of the team here at Sumisho Global Logistics USA. I want to thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, 3 Proven Cold Chain Tactics to Eliminate Spoilage and Maximize Profits. We have some really amazing information here for you today, and I'm so grateful that all of you took the time on this Wednesday, right before the holidays, to come out and just spend a little time with us talking about what is probably one of the most stressful but important areas of the supply chain. I think it can be one of the most challenging areas. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. And so we're really glad that you made it today. So for anyone who's new to SGL, or Sumisho Global Logistics USA, we are a global NVOCC with an expertise in refrigerated cargo. And that especially goes for high-value commodities where even small temperature slips can mean big losses. Our focus is on reliability, visibility, and giving shippers real peace of mind. And we've spent the last 40 years in business not only learning, but building a playbook in order to achieve those goals. And we're really excited to share some pieces of that playbook with you today. Speaking of expertise, I am joined today by the master of cold chain NVOCC, and that is our manager, Ray Minott, who will be leading the conversation. So Ray, I would love for you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll get started.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Minott. I head up the cold chain department at Sumisho Global Logistics. I have 39 years of experience in the logistics world, to include not only civilian world, but also in the military. On the military side, I actually was a battalion commander for Marine Terminal Unit. So now I understand terminal and vessel operations. And I was the chief of operations for Transportation Brigade. I've spent the last 14 years with Sumisho Global Logistics, and a lot of the concepts that you will see today, we have developed and found that they're proven to work. And there's one that we'll touch base on later on, where I'll show you exactly how it worked. Tessa, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ray. I really feel like with a military background, that really lends itself to something like this, where everything really needs to be regimented and consistent. So I'm really excited to be able to have you here to talk about this today. So for everyone, here's how today's going to run. We're going to answer 3 key questions today. How can you prevent failures before a shipment begins? What's the key to catching issues while the cargo is in transit? And then how do you protect the cargo during that final mile and that handoff? And then at the end of the session, you'll receive an email where you can book a free consultation with an SGL team member. And you'll also receive our free cold chain checklist, which is going to cover all the same concepts we covered today, so that you can have access to that and be as prepared as possible the next time you have a temperature sensitive shipment. In the meantime, we're going to start with our 30-minute Q&A session where I'm going to moderate and chat with Ray. It really will take about 20 minutes. And then we'll have a 5-minute Q&A at the end where you can ask your questions. Please feel free to send those questions in the chat and I'll be collecting them throughout. I'm also going to go ahead and start a poll for you to answer throughout the session where you can give us your thoughts on what do you think the biggest challenge is in cold chain. So I'm going to kick off that poll right now. And thank you so much. So Ray, let's get started. Let's get out of this introduction.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. So we know that the biggest problems often start small, and that means right at the beginning of the shipping process and getting it out from the origin warehouse. What would you say is the biggest risk that you run into at that point in the journey, and what are the most effective tactics for preventing those equipment and preparation failures before it's even out the door?
Okay, perfect timing. It's a very simple thing, but where at the very beginning things tend to go off of the rails is the incorrect temperature setting on the container or trailer, depending on which one you're moving, whether you're actually loading the ocean container from the warehouse or you are picking it up to bring it to a transshipment warehouse. That is probably one of the most, prevalent things that take place, but there are ways to fix that. Also, faulty equipment. It is extremely important that we check the equipment, and also contamination in the container or on the trailer. Next slide, please. Now, what you'll see here is one of the tactics, and a main tactic that we use to prevent temperature missettings on the containers. On the slide, you'll see a copy of the temp display on an ocean container on the genset. And this particular load needed to be set at minus 1.1 Celsius. Okay, on this case, what we have done to make sure we have the correct settings, when our trucker goes to pick up the container from the warehouse, even though supposedly the warehouse has set the temp, as a matter of fact, the temp was set from the terminal yard based on our booking when we booked it at the 1.1 Celsius, and the warehouse is supposed to check it, which we do ask them to do, and take a similar photograph to what you're seeing. We also have our truckers do the same thing when they go in to pick up the container to move it to whether the rail ramp or to the port. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, we had a situation recently, and when I say recently, I got the email about 45 minutes ago that our trucker had dropped the container at our customer supplier's yard. They loaded the container overnight, and somehow they changed the temperature setting. Again, that was a load that was supposed to be set at negative 1.1 Celsius. And unfortunately, they set it at negative 2.7. Fortunately for us, when our truck went in to pick it up this morning, they were able to detect the difference when they were taking the photograph, and they were able to adjust the temperature to the correct amount. So the product, based on when the container was loaded during the wee hours of the morning this morning, was only exposed to a lower temperature than it should have been for only about 4 hours. So we were very lucky in that, and that is why we have this procedure in place. It doesn't happen often, but even one time is too much, and that's why we have this check system. Also, now, when it comes to the equipment, drivers, when they go in to pick up the containers at the port, even though the containers or the trailers have been pre-tripped, the drivers need to check them to make sure they're functioning. The gen sets are starting, they're running for a period of time, and making sure that the trailer or jet or container are actually holding temp. En route to the load facilities, what we usually have all the drivers do is when they're about 30 to 45 minutes to 30 minutes out from the load point, we have them turn on the gen sets on the units. That accomplishes two things. One, we know it's running. Two, by the time he gets to destination, it should be down to temp for the actual loading process. Plus, we're also able to confirm that the unit is holding temp. Now, with the part about contamination, what we do, especially for trailers, because coming out to the port, the containers are supposed to be cleaned and pre-tripped, which the driver would have checked before departing. But on trailer loads that we're picking up when we're doing either a domestic move or a move to a transloading warehouse into the ocean containers, we make sure that the drivers en route to do their load, that they get washed out, and they obtain a washout ticket, which one, they will prove to the warehouse that they have washed out and the container is cleaned with that ticket. Plus, it's mandatory for them to forward us a copy of it too, so that we know that they did wash out. Next slide, please.
Well, before we move on to that, I just want to say how wild it is that this process, or rather that this situation happened today, and it really demonstrates the value of our process on this and the fact that it's something that can come up anytime and why it's so important to be prepared. I also know that we don't just photograph the temp set, we also photograph the seals, don't we? Making sure those are in place as well.
Yes, after loading, we do ask both the warehouse and the trucker to take a photograph of the seals. And for all of you out there, I always recommend if it is an international load, you're doing an ocean container, please only use CT-PAT certified bolt seals. You know, that is something that's been going back and forth over time, and it looks like it's going to be mandatory. Plus, you get a little extra level of security with it. And trust me, if you're putting the containers on the rail and they're going via LA port, you need every bit of security that you can get.
Speaking of security, let's talk about when the cargo is on its way. Ooh. And let's talk about in-transit deviations. So the things that are happening while the shipment is moving, and what risks have you run into there? And what would you say is the key to building a proactive monitoring system that catches those problems as they happen, so we can stop them in their tracks?
Perfect. There are several issues in transit that you can come across. One is what we call silent equipment failure. Just as I mentioned before, a genset won't start, or a genset malfunctions en route to the port. You know, especially if it's on a rail, that is a critical situation for you. Human errors, which we saw earlier today. Literally, somebody changed the temp. Don't ask me why, but we'll get to the bottom of that. And long periods without data. We do monitor all our loads every 4 hours while they're moving, so we can get a load on that one, so we know what's happening with the loads. But there's a new situation that has developed, and that will fall under our load security. One of the things that we have seen in the industry, especially over the last year, is that there seem to be some very unscrupulous people out there that have been able to obtain information on loads, and they actually send in trucks to the loading facilities impersonating the truck that is supposed to pick up the load, and they're actually getting loads. I know of about 6 instances that this has happened. Fortunately, none of ours, but knock on wood, we won't have a situation like that. And that has is becoming a more significant problem. One of the ways that we work around this, and this is critical, we have a procedure set up with our warehouse and our truckers. What we do is there's 5 elements of information that we obtain from the trucking company. One is the driver's name, driver's cell phone number, the truck number, the trailer number. And once we have those pieces of information, we pass that on to the warehouse to let them know, and also the trucking company's name, of course. We pass all those points on to the warehouse, letting them know this is the information on the truck that's coming in to pick up the load. In addition to that, on the day of load, we do track the loads with the trucker, and we get his approximate ETA to the time of pickup, and we forward that to the warehouse and said, by the way, in addition to the information, that truck will arrive, for argument's sake, at 10:30 in the morning. So not only do they know information on the truck that's coming in, but approximately what time he's going to pull into their gate, so they can triple check exactly who is coming in. And fortunately, nobody has actually tested us yet. But like I said, I know of about 6 loads that have been stolen. Some of them was loads of eggs. And I know beef and pork loads have actually been able to be obtained from the plants.
I've gone ahead and put on screen a slide that has that list of items that you can look for. But I'll also mention that this is actually in our cold chain spreadsheet. It's a fillable form, so you'll be able to fill that right into the document for yourself, so that every time you do a cold chain shipment, you can put that information right on top, so it's easily accessible for you. Ray, what I want to talk about next is points of redundancy, because the most important thing in transit that you've said is create that redundancy, create those check points. What are some points of redundancy that might not seem very useful, but they've actually been really surprisingly beneficial and really helpful in the long term in making sure that the loads in the cargo are protected?
Well, going back to the temperature settings, we do require the photographs from the warehouses and also the truckers. That forces both individuals supposedly to check the temps and make sure they're right. Also, another step that we take, and this will go into our tactics too, going on, is with the warehouses, when we get their documentation, not only is the truck traveling with copies of the documentation for the load, say, to the transshipment warehouse, but we also obtain copies of that ourselves to include photographs of the loads, and we forward that to the receiving warehouse so that they're able to identify exactly what they're supposed to receive at the time that prior to the truck actually arriving. So it's a double system on that, and particularly when we have loads that are going into the port. We do the same thing with the verifying prior to departure from the warehouse, the temperatures, and put them in. Now, on most of our loads, or I should say on all of our cold chain loads, one of the things that we like to do is we track the loads every 4 to 6 hours. We do check in with the trucking company, with the dispatcher. We have them trace the truck, give us their locations, and the approximate projected time of ETA. With that information, we also do a calculation from the previous reporting, and we can see how the progress that the truck is making, so we can ourselves project his time and to see if he has had any issues en route. With that, we also, as a double check system, we monitor the highway conditions on the route that the truck is traveling, and also the weather conditions, especially now in the winter months. That becomes a very critical process, especially if you are running loads, say, to a transshipment warehouse in Oakland, California, and you're on I-80 going through the Donner's Pass. You basically got to live on the internet double checking it, because that's always where the choke point is on the Nevada into California part. The Donner's Pass, and anybody remember the history of it? It hasn't changed much from the 1800s till now. It's always a choke point west.
Not surprising. So let's talk about that last leg of the journey now. How do you secure that last portion where the load is making its way to the drop-off point? What are some tactics that you use at that point to make sure that everything happens stress-free and the handover is as flawless as possible?
What we do is we, again, monitor the trucks and their routes. Also, I forgot to mention to you before that on all our loads, we run temp recorders inside, usually 2 temp recorders, one for redundancy in case one malfunctions. But usually we also retrieve one at the transloading warehouse where we do a download, make sure everything is good, and then we replace a second temp recorder in the container. So we monitor that as well. But for the final mile, say for example, it's actually the containers reach destination, we do track the trucks, and we provide the receiving warehouse with complete documentation on the loads, again, so that they know what they're getting, plus photographs of the load so they can see how the load has been blocked and braced, and they shouldn't have any issues with, leaning cargo or, God forbid something goes wrong. Because we've had situations where loads by the actual suppliers' warehouses were not blocked and braced properly, and the loads actually fell over and was leaning on the door. And when the receiving warehouse opened the door, there were cases falling out, which fortunately there are procedures in place at the warehouses so they know to stand to the side when they open the door so it doesn't hit them. But if the individual didn't do that, there would have been a problem.
Great, thank you. Are there any other secret tactics that you can share in their process that maybe, our attendees can take with them that we didn't mention already and that they might benefit from?
Well, I have a personal one that I would share with them. Don't be stressed about your reefer loads. Book your shipments with us and let me stress for you, okay? And then I'll do all the worrying. And only when we have a serious issue will I tell you it's time for you to worry.
Great tip, Ray. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to move on to the Q&A segment. We do have a couple questions in the chat. So our first question comes from Yasumichi, and he asks, how long does it take to settle the issue in case the cold chain is cut and the product gets damaged?
That depends, and very good question, because it varies dramatically. I'm going to assume that it's on an ocean container. In the case of an ocean container, a lot of the time it's going to take depends on which steamship line you're booked with. Okay, we book with various lines. I'll just throw out some names there. One, Evergreen, Yangming, OOCL. I would say potential claim after doing a survey at a warehouse. If using one, for example, I would say the process should take you about 30 to 45 days. Evergreen or OOCL, slightly different story. You're looking at a 2 to 3 month process.
Wow, that's a lot of time. And I think it really emphasizes why it's so important to be as on top of these steps as possible so that you can minimize the chance of issues like this occurring.
You plug the hole before it actually opens up. And those dates, that time frame that I threw out there, that's based on past actual experience.
Great to hear. So we do have another question from Ken this time. Is it possible to obtain real-time updates on temperature deviation?
There are systems out there that you can use that are supposedly satellite linked and will give you real and uptime updates. However, they're not 100% reliable these days. I have actually tested them. There's a lot of dead areas and that kind of stuff, and that creates an issue, especially if you have a container on board the ship. Okay, you know, and I said this to one of my customers that wanted to try it, apart from the current system that they're using with just the digital recorders. Yes, even if the satellite system works and it's on board the ship and it's halfway between the United States and Australia, for argument's sake, and you get a indication that there's a deviation on the temperature, okay, you got the information, but there's nothing you can do about it until the container gets to destination.
Yeah, that can definitely be frustrating and challenging. You know the problem's there, but you can't address it, so you're just kind of helpless.
Correct. You won't be able to do it. And then, you know, the digital recorders, they'll give you the same information when it gets to destination, and then you can address it with the line. I mean, you have the period to put the line on notice of claim if you detect a deviation from the standard recorders that there's a problem on the temperature and the load.
Makes total sense. All right, I believe that's all the questions we have, unless anyone has another one. But while we're waiting for more questions, I'll just summarize really quickly what we talked about today. Also, I don't know if anybody else is experiencing a technical difficulty with the chat. If you are, I apologize, but please feel free to send your questions because I can still see them. So step one in the process, before the shipment's even prepared, you want to make sure that you mandate visual confirmation of every step in the supply chain. So you want to make sure that you get photos from both sides, the trucker, the warehouse, making sure at every step you have that visual reference so that if something goes wrong, you can identify exactly where and when it went wrong. You also want to create redundancy and checkpoints as much as possible. It might seem tedious, but it's something that's going to help you down the line if a problem comes up, as Ray demonstrated today in the issue that he ran into this morning. And then you want to pre-coordinate as much as you can in advance of the last step of the delivery. Make sure that you always get the information from the driver, the carrier, the warehouse, as much as you can so that you are as prepared as possible. And all of this is covered in our cold chain checklist. that we'll be sending out right after it'll be about 30 minutes after this meeting ends. We will get your cold chain checklist out to you, and you can utilize that. It has a refresher on all of the steps we outlined today. And I do see we have one more question, and that question is from Nelson. So Nelson says, and I apologize, I'm going to have to read this slowly. I'm having very strange issues with the chat. At my previous company, we had multiple equipment failures with our refrigerated trailers. We had to rely temporarily on multiple refrigerated trailers parked outside our warehouse. Where do you see the most equipment failures in cold chains?
Usually it's not on the trailers. If you're having a lot of breakdowns on the trailers, that's usually due to very poor maintenance. Usually where we find a problem is on gen sets for the ocean containers. If something's good, usually those is where, you know, the weak link for us has been. But on the trailers, that tells me bad maintenance.
So I actually realized after I let you start answering, Ray, that it was industrial refrigerator that it was having the problem, and they were using the refrigerated trailers to resolve that. Do you have any other areas that you tend to see a lot of failures and thus you have to mitigate for them a little bit more?
Not in that case. Again, I go back to, you know, the gen sets for the ocean containers. That's usually where the weak link is. And occasionally we will find an ocean container that is not holding temp.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Ray. Thank you very much for chatting with me today and for sharing all this wonderful information about SGL's methods of managing the cold chain and ways that our viewers can manage theirs. You will get your cold chain checklist in the emails very shortly. There will also be a link to schedule your free consultation with an SGL USA supply chain cold chain manager. I also just put the link to that in the screen below, so you can click right there if you would like to schedule right away. Thank you so much for attending, and I really hope this was informative for you. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at inquiries@sglusa.com. We'd be happy to answer your questions or help you. Or if you need an NVOCC for a temperature-sensitive shipment, feel free to request a quote from us. Thanks so much, everyone. Happy holidays. If you want to rewatch this webinar, that will be available shortly as well. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you, Ray.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.